The sea has been lapping at these shores for untold thousands of years, most of the time gently. It's seen the Karankawa Indians come and go, the Spanish explorers, even Jean Lafitte, the pirate, before the Texans came to stay. Their children are still here, as is the sea. Most times, it's peaceful. And sometimes, it brings storms. On September 8, 1900, one such storm arrived.
I have seen many severe storms, but never one like this. In the quarter of the city where I lodged, everything was swept and nearly all drowned.
By dawn the next day, at least 6,000 men, women, and children were dead.
I saw hundreds of houses all destroyed with dead bodies all laying in the ruins, little babies in their mothers' arms.
Of the survivors, 1,000 were naked, their clothes ripped from them by the wind, water, and debris.
People were passing by, screaming and crying for help. The wind had ripped all their clothes off.
The 1900 storm caused a greater loss of life than the Chicago fire, the Johnstown flood, and the San Francisco earthquake combined. It remains the single most fatal natural disaster in our nation's history. The storm changed Galveston forever, economically, socially, politically, and it changed the nation as well, from the way we deal with weather to the design of our ports and seaside communities. It affected a whole host of social developments, from women's suffrage to disaster relief. All these changes came uninvited, unexpected, that warm, humid day in early September. Then, as now, Galveston was a jewel. 27 miles long, only 3 miles at its widest, Galveston combined the tropical allure of the Caribbean with the sophistication of a world-class city. Fine dining, theater, prosperous, glamorous people, a rich blend of cultures, and a thriving business as the main Gulf port west of New Orleans. Galveston was one of the largest and wealthiest cities in Texas, the first to have telephones and electric lights. The islanders were no strangers to violent weather. Half a dozen serious storms struck the island in the 19th century. Just 100 miles down the coast, the town of Indianola was completely wiped out by a storm in 1886. But most Galvestonians were accustomed to waiting out the storms and overflows of Gulf water into their streets. Too accustomed, as it turned out. Rapid development on the island made it even more vulnerable, as builders cleared the salt cedar trees that held the dunes in place and moved sand from the center of the island to fill in low-lying areas. The idea of a seawall was often raised during storm season and vanished just as soon as the rough weather did, until the great storm rolled through. Almost everyone who survived had family or friends who did not. Many of their stories were lost with the storm, but thousands have come down to us. Tragic, heroic voices from the storm, in the form of photographs, letters, memoirs, and oral histories, like the story of Miss Daisy Thorne.
Daisy Thorne was a 23-year-old school teacher. She taught the 7th grade at Rosenberg Elementary School. She lived at the Lucas Terrace apartment, which was very close to the beach in the East End. She was engaged to a Dr. Joe Gilbert, who was in Austin at that time. That Friday, she had gone down in the afternoon after she finished school to the Gulf to go swimming. But she decided not to go because the water was too rough, it was overcast, it was not a very nice day, and the water was just dirty.
Another character central to the story of the storm was, of course, the local weather forecaster.
Neither the barometer nor the winds were telling me, but the storm tide was telling me to warn the people of the danger approaching.
It was September the 7th when Dr. Isaac Klein first raised the hurricane warning flags. Dr. Klein had been in the Weather Bureau for 18 years, 11 years here in Galveston. His brother Joseph was also in the Weather Bureau and resided at the Klein residence. That evening, Dr. Isaac Klein checked the skies. He knew that if the sky appeared red, if it had a reddish brick tint to it, that it meant the storm was coming. But the skies were not red. There was no indication that a storm of its severity was coming to Galveston.
They were going about their normal business as late as 1 o'clock on the afternoon of September 8th. People were making appointments and thinking they were going to keep appointments.
For a while even, ladies were wading in the water thinking it was fun. The children had a grand time picking up driftwood and other things that floated down the street.
People were actually down at the beach watching the storm and the wave action and so forth. And the bathhouses, which were very large wooden buildings out over the water, started to crash up.
The bathhouses were breaking into pieces. Then, it wasn't fun anymore.
By 8 o'clock Saturday morning, Daisy Thorne's apartment house was surrounded by water, and neighbors began to shelter there.
Inside, most of the people are going up to the second floor to take refuge. Miss Thorne's mother is in ankle-deep water, and she is making biscuits and coffee for the people who are upstairs. Eventually, everybody has to go upstairs to get away from the water. Daisy, however, makes several trips down back to the first floor. One of the reasons she went down was to open the doors and the windows and let the water flow through and perhaps save that whole story there. The other was to rescue the 5 cats that she had as pets.
Little did any of them realize, even then, how much higher the waters would rise, or the incredible scope of the tragedy this day would hold.
Voices from the Storm is brought to you in part by Stewart Title.
The Morris family's had the privilege of leading Stewart Title for over 100 years. We've learned that
the right to own land is the most important factor in development of our civilization. Ownership of real estate provides
opportunity for all people to achieve their dreams. The partnership of free land
and free people has altered history. From the largest real estate investment to the smallest, trust Stewart Title.
This year, one insurance group will insure more drivers in more towns on more roads with just about the lowest rates in Texas.
Who's that?
It's Concord.
Car insurance guy.
Just think of us as a low-cost crossroads of car insurance.
Think you know that ain't no real sign?
At Concord, we're driving down the cost of car insurance.
I think he needs to get out of the sun.
Yep. But you won't know how much until you call him.
Sure, my arthritis hurts, but I don't like strong-smelling rubs, so I rub in odor-free Aspercreme.
Clinically proven to relieve minor arthritis pain in minutes.
It works well without the smell.
Aspercreme, clinically proven odor-free pain relief without aspirin.
He scratches itchy cuts, then opens the cut to germs again. But ordinary ointments don't stop itch.
Introducing new Gold Bond Triple Antibiotic Ointment. Gold Bond kills germs, plus stops pain and itch while cuts heal.
Gold Bond is extra protection.
Gold Bond Antibiotic Ointment. Kills germs, stops itch.
With hundreds of quality used cars to choose from, all you have to do is fill in the blank. At GM Driver Site, we put you in control of the buying process, so it's easy to find the used GM car or truck that's just right for you. Come to the GM Driver Site grand opening, located at Albertson Shopping Center, FM 1960 West, and Veterans Memorial.
The storm had been born almost 2 weeks before, 4,000 miles to the east of the Cape Verde Islands. On the 31st of August, it passed just south of Puerto Rico. On September 3rd, the storm curved northwest and crossed Cuba. On September 5th, it raked the Florida Keys, entered the Gulf, and became a full-fledged hurricane. 3 days later, it was about to consume Galveston.
Joseph Klein woke up at about 4 o'clock that morning, and he had this feeling of impending doom. And he woke his brother Isaac, and they looked out in the back and saw that the Gulf waters were already approaching the house. Isaac went to the beach to look at the waves, to take readings. Joseph went to the Weather Bureau. Isaac hitched his horse to a two-wheeled cart, and he went up and down the beach warning people. By 5 o'clock that morning, the tide was already 4.5 feet above normal. By 7:45, it started to rain, and people along the beachfront moved to safer houses.
Despite the early rain, people were going about Saturday like it was any other Saturday.
It wasn't until 10:10 that morning that the Weather Bureau changed its prediction, putting landfall for the storm to the west of Galveston and putting the city on the most dangerous side of the storm. By 11 a.m., Gulf waters covered almost half the island in some areas, coming inland as far as Avenue K, and still the islanders had no sense of the danger at hand. Throughout the afternoon, the tide continued to rise and winds increased, first from the north, then shifting to northeast. Houses near the beach were the first to go, floating off their foundations and breaking up in the waves. To the north, water covered the bridges to the mainland, cutting Galveston off from the rest of the world.
Many islanders were seeking refuge in more substantial buildings. Some of them went to St. Mary's Hospital, which was located on 8th and Market. And once there, about 500 people in all, they took refuge even in the rooms with the other patients. Now, even the livestock made their way to higher ground. Somebody reported a cow on the second floor at St. Mary's.
The Tremont Hotel, already a famous Galveston landmark, held over 1,000 people through the storm. Businessmen, travelers, workers. Guests moved to the mezzanine when the lobby began flooding.
One of our most poignant letters is one that was written at the time of the storm. It is an anonymous letter. It's written at John Seeley Hospital. We don't know who wrote it.
12 noon. Things beginning to look serious. Water up to the first floor in the hospital. All over the basement of the hospital. Cornices, roofs, window, lights, blinds, flying in all directions. The scenes about here are distressing. Everything washed away. Poor people trying vainly to save their bedding and clothing. Methinks the poor nurses will be trying to save their beds in short order. Now flames in the distance. It is all a grand, fine sight. Our beautiful bay, a raging torrent.
Around 1 o'clock, what may be the first death occurred when a baby fell out of a window on 26th and Avenue N and drowned in the water that covered the yard. By 4 o'clock, the winds had reached full hurricane force, gusts measured as high as 100 miles an hour before the wind gauge blew off at around 5:15.
Terror, pure terror. They said all they could do was pray. And they said when they got in the courthouse, it was just a mass of babies crying, the smell of diapers, and also the smell of liquor, because people were drinking out of fear and habit. And among all these poor folks were people in swallowtail coats and silk hats, but they were all suffering the same fear.
Isola Collins' great aunt was one of many storm survivors who left an oral history of what they'd seen, an actual voice of the storm.
Oh, it was a awful thing. You want me to tell you, but no tongue can tell it.
Then her husband saw the school swing. It started swaying back and forth, and they went behind that to what was a formerly all-white school, Rosenberg School, which was built of masonry. Then her husband, Ed, told her to come on up there to that second floor, and they were sitting in a hall, but she said all of a sudden Ed came, her husband, and said, let's move away from here right now. Let's go. And he wanted her to go to another hallway. Immediately after they left, a lightning bolt struck through, it seems though it was a chimney flue, and 16 people were killed right where she had come from.
Reports vary widely on the progress of the storm, but all agree that the tide kept rising, reaching its peak between 8 and 9 p.m. when the center of the storm crossed the island. This was the storm surge, the tidal wave that develops beneath the center of the storm where the barometric pressure is the lowest.
Suddenly there was a sensation, such as one feels in a boat being lifted by a giant swell. The house rose, floated from its 6-foot foundation, and with a terrific jolt, settled on the ground. We children were submerged in 5 feet of water, and the soldiers, groping frantically about, finally fished all 3 of us out and handed us, gasping and dripping, to our mothers.
And this really was the final blow to Galveston. Buildings that might have survived the winds just couldn't take this wall of water. When it crashed in, it swept with it all the other debris, the railroad ties, the other broken homes, and forced them even farther into the city.
The human loss was immediate and violent. Hundreds of islanders were washed from their homes and under the waves as their dwellings disintegrated. When darkness arrived around 7 p.m., the winds were gusting at 120 miles per hour and more.
And my grandfather said the worst thing about the storm, he said, were the sounds. And he said it sounded like 1,000 demons screaming in the night. And he said he would hear children calling for their mothers. He would hear women screaming for help. And he would hear men begging for mercy from God.
5 large ships and countless smaller ones anchored to the port were tossed about violently. Many were destroyed. Others were set adrift in high seas to sink or run aground some miles away. One ship's metal plating was pierced by a 6-inch plank, a testament to the power of the winds. And though the storm was passing, the worst was yet to come.
For weeks I had these nagging headaches. I didn't even want to go out. Didn't enjoy people. My neighbor referred me to Diagnostic Clinic.
It's time for answers. Refer someone you love to Diagnostic Clinic of Houston, 797-9191.
These days, you can never have too much security. A premise built into every Schlage lock. Stop them with a Schlage.
It's your Texas Ford dealer's biggest event of the year. Summer savings days are here, and it's a great time to save like never before on the best-selling wheels around. Like the legendary Ford Mustang, now with 0-9 and 500 cash back or 1,000 cash back. And during summer savings days, save big on a hip new Ford Focus, the North American Car of the Year. It's summer savings days going on now, only at your Texas Ford dealer.
I'm so happy I referred my neighbor to Diagnostic Clinic for her headaches. Now she's enjoying life again, and we both have peace of mind.
It's time for answers. Refer someone you love to Diagnostic Clinic of Houston, 797-9191.
The great storm continued to rock the island throughout that Saturday night, the worst of it passing by 11 p.m. when the waters began to recede. Around midnight, people began to emerge, those who could, crawling out from the debris and down from attics and branches of trees where some had clung for safety.
Waves were smashing into the windows Daisy's mother began reading from the Bible. The people crowded into Daisy's bedroom because that was the farthest away from the Gulf. The tide had risen to such a point it had picked up huge construction timbers from the Fort Point area and were sweeping them along, battering at the Lucas apartments. A hallway collapsed. The parlor collapsed. Eventually, most of Lucas Terrace was swept away. In fact, the only thing that wasn't destroyed was Daisy Thorne's bedroom, where all these people had taken refuge. And it was resting on the wreckage of the rest of Lucas Terrace.
When Isaac Klein returned to his house, he found 50 people there. But then a quarter-mile section of trolley track, lifted by the wind and the rain, was sent tossed like a toy, and it crashed against the Klein residence. Joseph Klein was in one room with two of his nieces. He grabbed them and he ran backwards through a window. Joseph and the two girls were free of the house. There was a piece of floating debris. Joseph put the two girls up on the wreckage and climbed up himself, and he looked in the water, and he saw no one. Dr. Klein was in one room with his wife, Cora May, and his 6-year-old daughter. He tried grabbing them, but the house tilted and they were pulled from him.
My wife's clothing was entangled in the wreckage, and she never rose from the water. I was pinned under the timbers and thought I would be drowned.
Dr. Klein was trapped. Somehow, he woke up later. He had a great timber behind him and another timber that was perpendicular, pounding the water out of his chest.
A flash of lightning revealed my baby girl floating on wreckage a few feet away. I struggled out of the timbers and reached her. A few minutes later, during another flash, I saw my brother and my other two children clinging to wreckage. I took my baby and joined them on the floating debris.
And then it was Joseph Klein, Isaac Klein, and the 3 Klein children aboard this raft. But Cora May was lost.
My grandfather was a survivor of the storm, and they lived on 15th and Post Office in a very large house. What had happened was their house was swept away, and the neighbor's house next to him, the roof came off of the house, and by complete accident, and thanks be to God, he grabbed my grandfather and yanked him up on the roof. And on the roof was a duck and a little tiny baby in a basket and an African-American lady and this gentleman. I don't remember his name, unfortunately. And they floated for a day.
People did many things during the storm. They would grab hold of anything that was floating. One man crawled inside a cypress cistern, which was floating aslant on the water in the city in those days, and saved his life like that.
The Ursulines operated a school for girls on Galveston Island, and it was to Ursuline Academy that 1,500 Galvestonians went seeking refuge. The floodwaters filled the first floor of the academy. The sisters from the second-story balcony scooped in refugees as they floated by. One of the sisters tied a rope around herself and would jump into the water with the sisters holding on to the other end of the rope, and she would swim to these refugees, grab them, signal to the other sisters, and they would pull them in. She would jump in repeatedly, and then she saw this trunk, and there was a noise coming from it, and so she swam over to the trunk, grabbed it, and brought it in to the convent, and inside was a woman who had given birth to a baby.
From the diary of a Jesuit priest who survived the storm, and from the legacy of the Sisters of Charity, comes the story of one of the storm's greatest tragedies.
Our sisters operated an orphanage on the Gulf, right on the beach. We had 93 children and 10 sisters.
Bravely did these sisters of the incarnate Word battle with the tide and hurricane to save their little charges.
They saw the boys' dormitory collapse.
And when they could do no more, they bound the little orphans together in bands of 5 or 6 and tied them to their waists to keep them near them still. Yet the cruel waters swept away their home.
The building literally collapsed. The roof fell in. The walls collapsed in on the on the children and the sisters. Somehow, 3 young boys managed to escape through the windows. But unfortunately, the 10 sisters and the 90 children were washed out into the Gulf with the collapsed building, and all of them died.
And when day did break, it was sunshine, and all that they could see was destruction. Uprooted trees and houses that had floated and crashed together. In addition to the people, there were the animals, you know, like the dead chickens and horses and such as that. They were having impromptu prayer meetings and things on the sidewalk. And the black people, my grandfather and grandmother say that they made up a spiritual on the spot. The song went something like this: somebody got lost in that storm, somebody got lost in that storm. And then they would go on and they just made it up on the spot. My brother got lost in that storm. And then they would point to a lady and she would say, my sister.
And now the day had come, and there was nothing in the large city for its famished and naked inhabitants to eat, or with which to clothe their naked bodies, for the Gulf had robbed or destroyed everything.
I had a grandmother and aunts and uncles who lived in the East End, and their houses were just splinters. They never would have found her place, but my aunt had a Polly that was up in the attic, and the attic didn't go to pieces. It just sat on top of the house, and the next morning the Polly was hollering, "Pretty Polly, pretty Polly." That's how they found where they lived.
I could not help seeing many bodies, though I was not desirous of seeing them. There is not a building in town that is uninjured. Hundreds are busy day and night clearing away the debris and recovering the dead. It is awful. Every few minutes, a wagon load of corpses passes by on the street. The city is under military rule, and the streets are patrolled by armed guards.
The loss was truly inconceivable. To this day, it remains the single most fatal natural disaster in United States history. The actual toll will never be known, but the best estimates agree that more than 6,000 died on that one dreadful day. In just 15 hours, Galveston was transformed from a thriving port, the jewel of the Gulf, to a desolate and demoralized sandbar.
There was a great wall of debris that wrapped itself around the city.
Here was a barricade as high as a 2-story house, seemingly endless toward the east and west. House upon house, all broken to pieces. Furniture, pianos, sewing machines, cats and dogs. And what was underneath? Nobody knew yet how many people had gone down with their houses.
To the human toll was added incalculable property destruction. Electric, phone and telegraph lines, water, sewage, street lights, even the streets themselves, all gone. The island was cut off from the mainland, except by boat. No running water, no streetcars, very little food or shelter, all of life's basics, gone. The only sounds that bright blue Sunday morning were the pealing of bells at the Ursuline convent and the anguished voices of the injured and the mourning survivors.
The good news from Goodson with Rocky McCullough and Dick Cricket.
The good news is the Goodson Guarantee.
The Goodson Guarantee?
That's right, co-anchor.
Yeah.
If while shopping for a new car or truck, you happen to find a better price on the exact same vehicle that Goodson has in stock, Goodson will either beat that price or give you $500.
That means they get the Goodson treatment and the Goodson deal.
That's right, co-anchor.
I've got a guarantee, too.
What's that?
I I guarantee that he's a lot better looking on TV than in person.
Nobody beats a Goodson deal.
If you're like me, you don't have a lot of time to shop. That's why I go to Gallery Furniture for one-stop shopping. When I shop at Gallery Furniture, I know that I'm getting the best price on a huge selection of furniture, big screen TVs, and accessories all in one place. And whatever I'm shopping for, I can buy today and enjoy in my home tonight. One-stop shopping means more time doing the things I want to do, like enjoying all my beautiful new furniture and accessories from Gallery. So remember, one-stop shopping at Gallery Furniture saves you time and saves you money.
The Morris family's had the privilege of leading Stuart title for over 100 years. We've learned that
the right to own land is the most important factor in development of our civilization. Ownership of real estate provides
opportunity for all people to achieve their dreams. The partnership of free land
and free people has altered history. From the largest real estate investment to the smallest, trust Stuart Title.
We didn't build the full-size Tundra to take on other trucks. We built it to take on anything. Toyota Tundra, Motor Trend Truck of the Year.
That Sunday morning dawned bright and deceptively calm, revealing an unimaginable scene of destruction. The wreckage was filled with the dead and the dying, all their worldly possessions in a terrible tangle. Many of the bodies and survivors were naked, their clothes ripped from them by the wind and debris. Hundreds of entire families perished, and almost every family lost someone. From 8,000 to 10,000 people were suddenly homeless. Those who had homes gave shelter to those who did not. Dazed people wandered about looking for families or any familiar face. A New York Journal reporter wrote,
"In the short time I have been here, I have met and talked with women who saw everyone they loved on earth swept away from them out into the storm. But I have not seen a single tear. The people of Galveston are stunned with the merciful bewilderment which nature always sends at such a time of sorrow."
In the aftermath of the storm, my grandfather said that there was, of course, no water, there was no food, and that the heat became oppressive. That plus the fact of the flies and the different vermin that was on the island as well, that a lot of people actually lost their minds from it.
The whole town is a perfect wreck. You can't picture the awfulness of it all. And as for dead bodies, we couldn't sit on the galleries at all without seeing wagon loads of them going by. There were 2 wagons full taken from the wreck right here in front of us.
On Monday morning, they decided that there were too many bodies to be buried. And so they were loaded onto a railroad barge, approximately 700 in number, weighted down with sash weights from window sashes, and taken out in the Gulf and dropped overboard into the sea. Tuesday morning, they washed up. The West End, the main beaches, and on the mainland. And that's when it was determined that they needed to burn the bodies. So every 2 blocks, they took the wreckage of a home and other wreckage and stacked the bodies into it like cordwood and set them aflame. The work of cremating the bodies was so gruesome that men could barely stomach it. And they wore handkerchiefs over their face and nose and mouth to keep from breathing the scent. And they were given whiskey, unlimited supplies of it.
African Americans were made to do some of the worst work, to take the bodies out on the barges out to sea and dump the bodies. So it was not a time that we're particularly proud of in Galveston in that respect.
Some looting began as early as Sunday morning, and the law enforcement situation was grave.
The streets are patrolled by armed guards. They are expected to shoot at once anyone found pilfering. I understand 4 men have been shot today for robbing the dead. I do not know how true it is, for all kinds of rumors are afloat, and many of them are false.
The relief effort is a major story and a wonderful, wonderful example of human kindness, and people all over the world literally collected money. Children collected pennies. The citizens of Paris at Sacré-Cœur in Paris, which is a Jesuit church, collected money for Sacred Heart here in Galveston, which is also a Jesuit Catholic church. And Mark Twain gave a speech to benefit the orphans of Galveston and sent that money. Millions of dollars were literally collected and sent to Galveston. Clara Barton was the director of the Red Cross, and she came to Galveston personally to supervise the relief effort. She was 79 years old at the time, and it was the last relief effort that she personally supervised. African Americans were not allowed to go to the relief centers where supplies were being given out except in the afternoon. And what she learned was that at these relief centers, the good stuff was all gone by the afternoon, so the African Americans weren't getting the supplies that they needed. So she established a second Red Cross, the Negro Red Cross, and made it on an equal status with the American Red Cross, and relief supplies were funneled to both of those organizations at the same time.
We are gradually coming up out of the disaster which settled over the city, and we know that with our locality, deep water, and our commercial importance, that we will build a city here along modern lines, which will attract citizenship from all parts of the world.
Along with all this ruin came opportunity, and choosing among them required momentous decisions from leaders and citizens alike. From the beginning, the fundamental question was whether to rebuild at all. Some suggested abandoning such a vulnerable location, and some survivors did leave Galveston forever, but the many who stayed were determined not only to rebuild, but to fortify the city against any repetition of this disaster. Ideas were plentiful, and no one was stingy with advice. The suggestion that was adopted was an old one, creating a sea wall on the Gulf side of the island.
At this time, Galveston was still the biggest port on the Texas coast and the biggest port in the western Gulf of Mexico. The Houston Ship Channel had not been dug. So Galveston was still an absolutely critical economic player in the region. So there was never really a question of not rebuilding. They had thought of the idea of the seawall and had talked about a seawall since the 1880s, but nothing had ever come of it. But with the 1900 storm, all of a sudden, there was a much greater, obviously, a much greater impetus to do something to protect the island, to protect the city from that kind of devastation.
Through a unique collaboration of city, states, and federal resources, the money was found and the plans were drawn.
The initial plans are for a wall 17 feet high. The wall is going to be sloped to dissipate the energy of the waves as they strike it. There are pilings driven underneath into the sand to anchor the wall. And there's riprap, and riprap is large boulders. In this case, they're granite boulders that come in from up the hill country in the front to protect the beach and the sand from eroding the bottom of the seawall. And there were wooden forms that were put in place, and then the cement mixer trolley would come along and fill the forms. The forms were filled layer by layer.
The seawall was a massive undertaking, but it was only part of Galveston's salvation. You see, for the seawall to work, the citizens themselves would have the astonishing challenge of raising the city itself safely out of the reach of the water.
Look what you can get right now for $598 at Fingers.
I got this 4-piece cottage bedroom. Headboard, chest, dresser, mirror, everything.
I got this complete home office. Finger's big volume buying power means you can choose from a huge selection of furniture for just $598, like this 5-piece wrought iron and wicker dining room. And you can have it now with no payments till October. You get more furniture for your money at your fingers.
It's your Texas Ford dealer's biggest event of the year. Summer savings days are here, and it's a great time to save like never before on the best-selling wheels around. Like the legendary Ford Mustang, now with 0-9 and 500 cash back or 1,000 cash back. And during summer savings days, save big on a hip new Ford Focus, the North American car of the year. It's summer savings days going on now, only at your Texas Ford dealer.
Raising a sea wall was only part of the solution in the wake of the 1900 storm. In order for it to be effective, the whole east end of the island would have to be raised as well.
As civil engineering projects go, the grade raising is a really monumental effort. And one of the things I think is most interesting about it is with grade raisings, and Galveston's not the only place that's done it. Usually, though, when land is filled in to be built upon, it's done before there are buildings there, and in the case of Galveston, they do it while the buildings are there. And they come up with a pretty audacious plan to dig a canal behind the seawall, and they're going to bring over very large hopper dredges. What these dredges are going to do is they're going to go out in the Gulf, they're going to pick up sand and material, they're going to come down the canal, and they will pump this dredge material underneath raised buildings. It is an incredibly monumental task. The first thing they had to do was get agreements from people who had houses on where the canal was going to be. The city would pay for moving the house, and then they would move the house back after the grade raising and put it back where it was on newly raised land. Private individuals were responsible for raising their houses, their chicken coops, their outhouses, whatever structures they wanted to see after the grade raising, they were responsible for raising them. Fences, any kind of outbuildings. The city raised the gas lines, the trolley lines, all of the city infrastructure that was there. The city agreed was responsible for raising. In the case of really large homes, in some cases, they would fill in basements or they would fill in the first floor and add a story or add on elsewhere on the property. The whole island wasn't completely raised. About 500 square blocks were raised. Somewhat over 10 million yards of fill were pumped in. The largest building raised was St. Patrick's Church, and there are records of services being held while it was on top of its jacks. Houses, obviously, were much easier, and there are pictures of the sort of catwalks and little shaky wooden walkways that were put in neighborhoods while all this was going on.
And the newspaper ran a pretty interesting article that said these catwalks were dangerous for the corpulent or those with the downtown club habit, meaning the inebriated sometimes fell off of the catwalks.
Another vital link in Galveston's recovery, a new causeway linking the island with the mainland, was completed in 1912. These massive projects did create some environmental complications.
They had problems with the seawall. Was one of those good news, bad news kinds of things, in that, yes, it did keep wave damage from coming, but what they found also was there was a scouring action that developed that took away the beaches. And they come up with a system of rock groins that you see down there now to hopefully attract sand and to rebuild the beaches in front of the seawall. Now, in the 1990s even, they do beach renourishment where they literally come and pump more sand in there.
Still, the seawall and grade raising performed as advertised, protecting the island from the inevitable storms to follow. The major projects of the recovery set off a modernizing frenzy in Galveston that continued for many years, and by 1912, Galveston was second only to New York City as a port for the growing nation. Houston would eventually surpass Galveston as a port. With the deepening of the ship channel and the mainland's more reliable road and rail connections. But Galveston continues to thrive. Its cool breezes and gentle waves and warm waters make it a favorite playground for visitors from Texas and beyond. And its businesses, educational and maritime enterprises continue to flourish. And the storm left another legacy, the beginnings of modern storm forecasting, and a new attitude for the awesome power of nature.
Texas Best Hotline, can I help you? Texas Best Critter? Well, that'd have to be the armadillo. Best day to visit Texas? Any day that ends in a Y. Texas Best Smoked Sausage? Well, if you ask me, it's Blue Ribbon Premium Smoked Sausage. Blue Ribbon's made with lean cuts of pork and beef, spiced just right, then slow smoked to bring out all that true Texas taste. The best way to top a Texan? Well, with the cowboy hat.
There are a lot of kids in our community doing good things. That's why Sterling Bank and Channel 11 are proud to bring you good news about good kids. How many teenagers do you know will get up early on a Saturday morning, come downtown, and help feed the homeless? With the help of a local church and grocery store, these kids from Albright Middle School do just that. Every Saturday morning, they help feed nearly 200 people. Hey kids, take the time to help somebody out. You'll feel real good about it. And what do we say at Sterling Bank? Good kids are awesome.
How clean's it gotta be?
Mom clean.
Eckerd guarantees express photo 1 hour processing in 1 hour and not a minute more, or they're free.
Oh, they look like angels. Some days.
Because as we all know, timing can be everything.
Hey guys. Oh, now we're cleaning the kitchen?
For photos in an hour guaranteed, call 1-800-ECKERDS or visit Eckerd.com to find the express photo center nearest you.
With his many years as director of the National Hurricane Center in Miami, Dr. Neil Frank is one of our nation's most trusted experts on the awesome power of tropical storms. As he looks back on this one, he observes that we learned a lot, and we still have a lot to learn.
Well, it's amazing in terms of predicting in 1900 that they even tried it. They had nothing to work with, essentially. They had a few surface observations, I'm talking about weather observations, primarily along the coastline and back into the interior of the eastern part of the country. And then there was 1 or 2 observations down to the Caribbean on some of the islands, and that's all. Part of that apathy that took place as this hurricane was approaching, I'm talking about the 1900 hurricane now, was part of the apathy was due to the meteorologist in charge, or the weatherman in charge down there by the name of Isaac Klein. He was assigned to Galveston in 1888. And in 1891, he wrote a paper, an article for the paper, and he made three statements. He said, first of all, we don't have to worry about Caribbean hurricanes in Texas. Well, we know that's wrong. Second, he said the shallow water off the coast of Galveston is going to protect us against the rising water, and we now know that's wrong. As a matter of fact, just the opposite is true. The shallower the water, the higher the storm surge, the higher this dome of water. And third, he felt like that you could really make homes that would be safe during a hurricane, and we know that if you live right on the coastline, that's probably not true. Well, in 1900, it wasn't even possible to evacuate. They only had train tracks across back to the mainland, and then, as I recall, there was one bridge that you could take a horse-drawn carriage. They were literally trapped there. And the concern I have today is that we may get our people trapped there in the same way if we have one of these meteorological surprises. The escape routes get cut off, and we've got tens of thousands of people trapped on them. How long does it take to evacuate a coastal area like the Galveston-Houston area? Well, we now know that it probably takes somewhere in the order of 30 to 36 hours if those people who would be flooded by the storm surge are the only ones that evacuate. Now, we know that a lot of other people inland that would be affected by the winds are probably going to get on the roads and evacuate too, so 30 to 36 hours. is a minimum time that you would need to do your evacuation. And I'm here to tell you that the meteorological nightmare that we live with on the Texas coast is if we had some kind of a weather disturbance. I'm talking about a tropical storm, maybe a weak hurricane, moving across the Gulf of Mexico. It's not showing any signs of strengthening, and so we put up some warnings, but we don't evacuate huge areas of the coastline. And then in the final 12 or 18 hours before landfall, this storm starts to strengthen quite rapidly, and the rising water cut off the escape routes. And here, of course, in the Houston area, that would be on I-45, and people get trapped on places like the island. I really don't know what the answer is to that, because I do know that it takes more time to evacuate than we're probably going to give in some kind of a future hurricane warning. One thing I can tell you is there's a much greater awareness of the hurricane problem today than there was in 1900. And at least the people know that they're in vulnerable places. Whether we're going to get them all out or not is another question. One of the concepts that we've been suggesting now for a number of years is if you get trapped, go up. Go into some kind of a major multi-story building. You know, there's a number of those in downtown Galveston. At least you could get back there and go up into those buildings and probably survive. That's what happened to 1,000 people in the Tremont Hotel during the 1900 storm. Over 1,000 people survived because they went into the hotel and then went into the upper floors.
Voices from the Storm is brought to you in part by Stewart Title.
The Morris family's had the privilege of leading Stewart Title for over 100 years. We've learned that
the right to own land is the most important factor in development of our civilization. Ownership of real estate provides
opportunity for all people to achieve their dreams. The partnership of free land
and free people has altered history. From the largest real estate investment to the smallest, trust Stewart Title.
Joe leads an incredibly exciting life.
We will give you $20 million.
Oni dadzam 10 milionów dolarów.
Joe is also living on borrowed time.
Dobrze.
2 Swiss accounts. One in his name and one in mine.
For the rest of us, Joe's Lexus is excitement enough. Introducing the new IS. It's sufficiently radical.
There's something going on. The sale of the year. Star sale of the summer is happening here.
This is the ultimate furniture sale, the biggest one in the history of Texas. Get our lowest prices for the rest of the year, guaranteed in writing. Everything is on sale at our absolute lowest price. Plus no monthly payments, no finance charges till the year 2001.
Star Furniture!
The ultimate furniture sale starts Saturday.
Get to your Texas Ford dealer now, because summer savings days are here. And it's the right time for you to get the season's best savings on a tough new Ford truck. Now, drive the best-selling F-150 for only $199 a month. Or check out the all-new F-150 Super Crew with 4 full-size doors and room for 6. Plus, get into a Ford Ranger now with great low 0.9 financing and $500 cash back. Summer savings days mean big savings on every Ford truck. Don't wait. Get to your Texas Ford dealer today.
Even those who did survive that day have since left us, but their voices live on. Daisy Thorne's fiance, Dr. Joe Gilbert, was in Austin when he heard that Daisy had been killed. He found her alive in Galveston.
On September the 13th, Dr. Gilbert and Daisy were married. It was the first marriage that had taken place in Galveston after the Great Storm. It took place in Grace Episcopal Church. The bride and groom walked through ankle-deep mud to recite their vows. The next day, they left to go to Austin. Daisy took with her one of the cats that she had rescued.
About a month after the storm, the body of Isaac Klein's wife was found. She had become entangled and trapped under the wreckage that they were floating on. Dr. Klein eventually became chief of the Weather Bureau in New Orleans. His brother Joseph became chief of the Weather Bureau in Puerto Rico and then Dallas.
The voices of the storm tell thousands of stories, stories of great courage.
Well, I think it shows that they had tremendous faith and what the future would hold. And it took tremendous courage and endurance to do what they did.
Stories of unimaginable loss.
It's not a story that we think of as 100 years ago. It's a story that's alive in our hearts. It stays alive for us.
Stories of miraculous rescue.
And by complete accident, and thanks be to God, he grabbed my grandfather and yanked him up on the roof.
And in all these voices, we hear a common theme, the determination of the human spirit to carry on in the face of life's greatest challenges, and to find in the gravest events a real opportunity for renewal.
They were just like the pioneers that stayed in spite of the Indians, the weather, and everything else. It was that fortitude. It was something that was inside of them that made them stay.
Oh, the people then were very strong. I don't know that we could do that again today. Maybe we could. But to have survived something like that, and then go around for the next 10 years with first the seawall being built, and then the grade raising going on.
It's a spirit, it's heart. This was where they wanted to live, and no force of nature was going to overcome them.
And I think that echoes through Galveston. It echoes through the hearts of all of us who are from here, that somehow, no matter what we lose, and no matter what we may lose, we'll always have the strength to rebuild and the courage to come back.
We learned many practical lessons from the 1900 storm about weather prediction, emergency preparedness, and safer shoreline development. But the most important lessons are those that come from the examples of those who chose to stay, to rebuild this beautiful city by the sea. Their voices, the spirit of their courage lives on.